Alright, welcome back guys. So in the last video we set up our Django backend API and now we have the full JSON Web Token authentication all set up. And now in this video I'm going to go ahead and set up the React client. So I'm going to have an Express server serving the React client as I mentioned before. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and get started on in this video. And I don't know if I'll get it all done in this video, probably not. So there's probably going to be another part after this as well. So anyway, let's get started. So right now I've already opened up my VS Code editor and ran my Django backend API just so I have that server running. And then inside of here, I'm going to create a front end folder. So this folder is where I'm going to have the Express app set up, and then I'm going to have the React client inside of there and have the Express server serving the React client. So the first thing I can just start off with is showing you how to even do that. So inside of another terminal, I'm going to navigate into front end. I'm going to do an npm init-y. That's going to create my package JSON file inside of here. And then from there, I can do things like npm install, save express, and that way I can set up an Express server. So I can also do touch index.js just to create an index.js file. And then this index.js file is going to be the Express server. So the next thing I'm going to do is npx create-react-app. And then client. So I'm going to make sure to do this while I'm inside of the front end folder. And that's going to create a client folder inside of here, which is my React project. I'm just going to click enter to that and have it building. And I'm just going to minimize this and start working on my Express server here. So what I have to do, first of all, is const express equals require express. And when we're putting together an Express app, we don't have the ES6 syntax, so we have to do it like this. And then the next thing I'm going to do is const app is equal to express. And then from there, I can do app.listen. So I'm going to listen on a port. So I'm going to do const port is process.env.port. And if that doesn't exist, I'll just default to port 5000. So I can pass in ports. And then I can also have a callback function, which will just console log server listening on ports. So there we are. So now the next thing is, how do we now serve the React client? So this React client, it's going to have a production build folder that we can create, and then we need this Express server to serve that production build folder. That's the way that's going to work. So this finished up. So I'm going to now navigate into the client folder. I'm going to do an npm run build right now. Oops, npm run build. There we go. So now that's going to create this build folder, and then I need to serve that in here. So how can I serve that? So right over here, what I can do is create a route handler. So app.get, and then this is going to be a wildcard route, where then I have my request response callback. Then from here, I can return a response.send file. And then I can send the file that's going to be the index.html file, because this right here is our React app, which depends on all these other static files in here. So that's one thing. I need to also have the static files being recognized and served by Express. So I'm not going to do that yet, just so you can see that sort of error. And then I also need to somehow send the path inside of here. So the way I can do that, so I'm just going to open up, actually no, inside of here I'm going to navigate back just so I'm inside of the front end. So I can do a pwd just so you can see I'm inside of front end. Then I can npm install save path. So this is going to be an npm module that helps me with this process. And then I can do const path is equal to require path. And then I'm going to do const my path is equal to path.resolve. So I can resolve a path with dir name and then build. Actually, no, it's going to be client, then build. And then index.html. So this right here, dir name is going to be an absolute path to the current directory. And then we're going to have client. So current directory is going to be the absolute path to this front end. Then we're going to have client, build, index.html. So what this is going to end up being is something that looks like an absolute path. So things like users, Bryan in my case, it'll be something like that, and so forth. And then front end, client, build, index, HTML. So we're going to end up with a string that's something like this. And then just to make it really clear, I'm also going to console log. First of all, so dir name, just so you can see what this is. So this is just a special node variable, which does exactly what I mentioned, just gets the absolute path to the current directory. Then I can also console log my path, just so that you can see all of that. And then this right here, I'm just going to send back my path. So this is all set up right now. So the next thing that I can do is, well, inside of my front end folder, I can go do node index.js. So right now, server listening on port 5000. So back inside of here, I can do localhost 5000. And then right now, I get a blank screen. And the reason for that is that one thing I mentioned with these static files. Right now, Express does not recognize these static files, but we can see the application here. And then if I go back, I'm also going to see some output here. So I can see the output of dir name, which is an absolute path all the way to front end, which is this current directory. And then I can also see my path, which is that entire thing that dir name spit out, client build index.html. So this path resolve, when you pass this, is going to give you an absolute path here, which then you can serve, which is why we see the React app right over here. Now, of course, it's blank, so we're going to have to solve that. And I'm just going to clean this up a bit now that it's clear what all this is. And then instead of storing this in a variable, I'm just going to pass it directly in here, just because I think that's a little bit cleaner. And then right below, or sorry, right above here, I'm going to do an app.use express.static. And then I'm going to put a path here, which is going to be client/build. So these are the static files that I want Express to recognize and serve, because in this build, we have all of these static files which it needs to recognize. So that way, now if I go back here, nothing's going to change, because right now changes on our server aren't being reflected here. So one thing that we can do is npm install save nodemon, and that's going to make this whole process a lot better. That way I can open this package JSON. In the scripts, I can put a start script, which is just going to be nodemon index.js. So now instead, I can just do npm start. Npm start. And then that way, now we can see our React app is being served by Express. So it's as easy as that to serve your React application with Express. All right, so why are we even serving our React app with Express in the first place? Well, it's because we want to store our access and refresh tokens inside of the httpOnly cookies. So with the cookies, you're going to have your React client, and then you're going to have your backend API, which in this case is going to be Express, that's serving the app. And then we're going to have cookies. Now the cookies, the behavior of them is on your requests, they get sent in your requests automatically. But the domains have to be the exact same, unless you do some different changes to the options of a cookie, like let's say set the same site property, or the same site option rather, to something like none, and then do some other things inside of your fetch requests. So you can sort of get around that. But for the most part, the default behavior is that browsers will not send along the cookies if the domain is different at the destination. So that is why we have the Express server serving the React client. And then that way the cookies can go back and forth. And then the Express server, it's going to be able to parse the values of those cookies. The browser won't be able to, because we're going to have the httpOnly flag set to true, meaning that JavaScript can't read the value on the browser. But of course on the server, on our Express server, it will be able to. We'll be able to parse those values and then send any authorized requests that we need to. Because we're using JSON Web Token Authentication, the way that we make authorized requests is we use the authorization header, where then we pass in the auth header type, so things like bearer and then your access token. So that's how we do the authorized requests, which is something that we saw in the last video. So that is kind of how we manage these values and how we keep them nice and secure. So with that, the next thing I'm going to start hooking up is maybe the React client, start working on that, because right now we have it getting served. But we will come back to Express, and we're going to have to create some different routes, so different route handlers on Express for things like login, register, verifying, logout, and also retrieving the user. All of those we're going to create in Express as well, because Express is what's going to allow us to actually read the values of these sorts of cookies. And then, yeah, I'm going to get back to Express a little later. So I'm going to open up this client folder, and let's start tweaking some stuff here. So we have app CSS, index CSS, logo SVG. I don't need any of that, so I'm just going to move that to the trash. Now I'm just going to set up some boilerplate, and then I'll see how far I can get in this video. So I'm going to open up these two files. So app.js, I'm just going to delete everything in here. Do const app, arrow function with a div, with an h1. That's just my app for now. Export default app. And then inside of index, the only thing I have to remove is this import here because we deleted this CSS file. Everything else I can just keep as it is. Close that up. And now let's start working on our folder structure. So I'm going to have components. So I'm going to place my different components. I'm going to have my containers where I'm going to have my different pages. And then I'm also going to have environment variables inside of here. So I'm going to do .env.local just so I have some of those set up, because in particular, I'm going to want React app API URL. And then in this case, it's going to be http://localhost 5000. So this is going to be where I'm making requests, where I'm sending my requests off to. And then you also have to do React _app_ before the name. That's pretty important with the environment variables in React. That way, this is a public environment variable, which you can just read directly. And then also when you do .env.local, you're going to see it grayed out here with Git. If you don't have that local part, then you're going to see that it's not grayed out. So in my case, I think I'll just do .env because I want to send it to the Git repository. That way people who download or people who clone the code can actually have the .env just be present in there. So in my case, I'm going to just have .env rather than the .env.local. So then the next thing I'm going to do is also create a config file, which I'm going to create an index.js where I can just export a const API URL, set that equal to process env API URL. Whoops, not API URL, but React app API URL. So this way, whenever I want to utilize that localhost 5000 API URL, I don't have to do this. Instead, I can just import this and just use this shorter naming rather than this long naming here. This is all that this config folder is for. And then I also want to have some relative pathing going on in here, because whenever I create something, like let's say if I create a Navbar, which I'm going to need. So inside of here, whenever I want to import something, so import whatever from, I have to do like some relative paths like this, but I don't want to do this sort of thing. So what I can do inside of this client is create a jsconfig.json file where I can set some options. So things like compiler options. And then here I can have a base URL, which I can set to source. So this source folder. And then I can also pass include, which is going to be an array where I pass in source. So this little config right here is going to make my pathing much easier. So let's say this nav bar. If I want something inside the container, I can just do whatever I want from there. And I'm going to import that from container directly. So container / whatever it is, rather than having to do // containers. So that's all that JSON config made, or JS config. All right, so with that, I'm going to create some of the things I need. I'll need a nav bar component. I'll need a layout component. And then I'm also going to have a couple pages. So I'm going to have things like a home page. I'm going to have a login page. I'm going to have a register page. And I'm also going to have a dashboard page. Ooh, there we go. I'm just gonna close these things up. I just wanna create the files that I'm gonna need. And then in terms of Redux. So normally with Redux, you're gonna create an actions folder, a reducers folder, but now we're using Redux Toolkit, and it's gonna be a little bit different because it takes away a lot of the normal boilerplate. So instead, I'm just gonna create a features folder. So if you generate a React project using that template Redux, it's also going to do this sort of thing. It's going to create a features folder and have the different features inside of there. So I'm going to do the same sort of thing. And then I'm going to create an auth.js file. And this is going to be everything to do with authentication with Redux. So that's where this is going to reside. And then I'm going to come back to this in a bit. Before Redux, I just want to set up my different general pages and routes. So I'm going to open all these up. I'm going to do, oh yeah, and by the way, you don't have to import React from React anymore with latest versions of React. So I can just do const dashboard page. And then return a div with an h1. That's going to be dashboard. And then export default dashboard page. I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to do something very similar in all of these pages, just so that I have the pages. So I'm going to have my home page. I'm going to have my login page. And my register page. So there we are. Got all my pages now, which obviously I'm going to tweak. And then the next thing I can do is get some routing. So I'm going to open up another terminal. I'm going to do an npm, or sorry, I'm going to navigate into front-end client first of all, and then do an npm start. So right now I have 3 terminals. So this localhost 5000 is going to be more like the production version. So it's going to be the Express server serving the React build folder. But this right here is going to be my development server with Create React App. So Create React App has the development server set up. So that's what I'm going to have running here. So I'm going to have 3 different things running. I'm going to have my Django backend API. I'm going to have Express, which currently isn't needed because I don't have any route handler set up, but I will have route handler set up. So Express will become more useful shortly. And then I'm also going to have my React client on localhost 3000. So quite a few things running here in the background. And then with React, in order to have routing, I'm going to now npm install save React router DOM. So that finished up. Also, don't worry about these vulnerabilities. That's just something I'll quickly point up since I know it might concern some people. So what I can do is just move this React script. So this React scripts is more of a development type dependency. So I can just create a dev dependencies, and then I can just place that in here because this is where those vulnerabilities are coming from, but this is not something that's going to be getting utilized in production. It's just something that makes our development a lot easier. So then I can just do an npm audit -- production, just so that you can see that in our production environment, we wouldn't have any of these vulnerabilities. This is just strictly on development, so it doesn't really matter. So don't be concerned about that. So now I have React router DOM. Also, I'm gonna npm start, just so I have that running in the background. Let's go back, there we go. And now in my app.js, I'm gonna set up this routing. So I'm going to have to import those different pages. I'm also going to have to import things from the React Router DOM package. So I'm going to need to bring in browser router, routes, and route. So this is the way you do things with version 6 of React Router DOM. So previously you would have things like a switch, but in this case we have this routes instead. And then we have to place these route components inside of a routes. That's also something that's required. Then here I can have my browser router. And then I can also make it a little nicer by referring to this as router. And then instead of browser router, I can just have router. So I think that looks a little nicer. And then you're going to have your routes, which you have to have. And then inside of here, you're going to have your individual routes, which are going to have a path and elements. So previously, you would have components, but now we have this element prop. Then I need to import my pages. So I'm going to import homepage. And then because we have that relative pathing, I don't have to do /. I can just do containers / homepage. Oops, I put my caps lock. So homepage and my 3 other ones. So I have dashboard and login and finally register. So now the way that you pass this isn't going to be like this with homepage. It's going to be like this. And this comes with some nice advantages, which is if you want to pass props forward to here, like prop 1 equals whatever your prop value is, you can do that through here, which previously with the way that React Router DOM worked is when you'd have this right over here, when you'd have something like that, there's no way to pass props forward. So that's kind of the reason why it was changed with version 6 to be this sort of approach. So then I'm going to set up my other routes as well. And then also another thing, before version 6 of React Router DOM, here we would have to put exact. Because if we didn't, if we went to something like the dashboard route, and then we have the dashboard page, it would render both of these. But right now with version 6, it's going to be a little bit smarter and we don't have to pass that exact prop. So then I'm also going to have a login route and a register route. So login page and register page. So there we go. We now have our routing all set up, which means that right here, I see home, and then I can go to /dashboard. I'll see my dashboard, login, and finally register. So all my pages are hooked up, but we don't have a very easy way of navigating between them. So let's go set that up. So to make all of my styling much easier, I'm going to be utilizing Bootstrap. So I'm going to look for Bootstrap. Whoops, I completely misspelled that, but it still showed up here anyway, so perfect. I'm going to go to the docs. And then one thing I want is a nav bar. If I can find it, where's my nav bar? Components, should be in here. There it is. So I'm just going to grab some code for these nav bars, and then I also have to just remember I have to bring in Bootstrap into my project. So right here you have this include CDN. If you scroll down a little bit from the home page, so I can just copy this, go back to my code, and then the place where I can put this is inside of my public index.html. And then also one thing I want to do is remove this meta tag while I'm inside of here, because we have this meta tag with name, description, and content, website created using create React app. I do not want that meta tag. And I also don't want this title because I'll be using something called React Helmet instead to be managing the titles and the metadata and so forth on my individual pages. So now I can just paste this in here. This is that link for the Bootstrap styling. Just gonna clean this up a bit. And then I'm going to grab the script tag. Just going to copy that, go back, and then inside of the body, right at the bottom, is usually where you put these script tags. And then I'm just going to make it look a little cleaner. And I'll do it like this. So there we go. Just like that, we now have Bootstrap in our project, so I can just save. And then I can create a nav bar. And then before I do the nav bar, I'm actually just going to create this layout. So const layout. And then here, I can have, say, my nav bar. Oops, that's going to be actually self-closing. So I can have things like my nav bar, and then I can have my actual page rendered between here. And then I can also pass some stuff like class name of container and margin top 5, just to have some spacing on the left and right with the container and some margin at the top of the page, because the page will go in here, which is going to be through this children prop. So on my different pages, I'm going to have things like layouts, and that's going to wrap the content of the pages. So that's the way that's going to work. So anything between layout is going to be children. So I can just destructure that from here. So this is a special prop that just makes it so that anything between here will get rendered here. And then if you have something like a self-closing tag, then you won't be utilizing children. Then I'll export default layout. And then I'm going to have to bring in my navbar. So import navbar from components and then navbar. That way this will actually render appropriately. And then there you go. This is my layout. And then another thing that I can do then is, like I said, npm install react helmet. And then I can set up some metadata inside of here. So now I'm going to do npm start once again. It's going to whip me back here. And then you can also see some Bootstrap styling getting applied already. And then I'm going to, right up here, bring in helmet from React helmet. And then I can use this helmet tag. So this helmet tag is very nice because now I can pass a title to each of my pages. So then I'm going to accept a prop of title, and then I'm also going to accept a prop of content, which you're going to see in a sec. So this title is going to go between here, and then I'm going to have a meta tag with the name of description, and content will be the content. So there you go. Now on each of my pages, I can utilize this layout. And then another thing I'm going to do is with the nav bar, just do nav bar. That's just going to be a div with an h1 of nav bar for now. And then I'm just going to export that. So this way you can actually just see the nav bar. So now I'm going to open up all of my pages. Then instead of having the div, I'm going to be utilizing the layout. Just going to import layout from components layout. Then I'm going to have this import on all of these other pages. All right. And then instead of the div, I'm going to have layout. So this right here is going to be what's inside of the children prop. And then I'm also going to have to pass the title prop, which in this case is going to be auth, site, and then dashboard. And then I'm also going to have the content, which will just be dashboard page. Usually you'd put something more SEO friendly inside of here, but I'm just going to keep it nice and simple to not waste time with that. And then I'm just going to copy what's inside of here. That way I can make this part a little bit quicker. So I'm going to do, in this case, home, and then home page. And then here I can paste and then do login page. And then finally in the register, paste in here and have register. And register page. So there we are. So now I have my nav bar being rendered, and then I also have inside of the children prop my page, which is just an h1 right now with the text of the page. Then I have that container class creating some padding on the left, and there's also padding on the right. And then also have some margin at the top with that empty -5 class. So now the next step is going to be to set up this nav bar, just so that we can have some routing in here. Well, we already have routing, but just to make it easier to navigate. So I'm going to open up my nav bar, and then back inside of Bootstrap, I'm going to find a nav bar that I like. So I just want a more simple one. Something like this I can easily edit. So I'm just going to grab this code. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to my project and just paste it in here. I'm going to fix up the indenting. And then all of these class things I'm going to change to class name, because that's how it's going to be in React. This isn't HTML we're writing. This is JSX we're writing. And then another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a return. And I'm going to wrap this in curly braces just because I'm going to need this. And you'll see why momentarily. And then I'm going to import some stuff here. So I'm going to bring in link and nav link from React router DOM. And then let's fix this up. So if I save this, it's going to fix the indenting for me because I have Prettier installed on VS Code. So that's nice and handy. Then instead of the text Navbar, I'm going to have auth site. And then this is going to be a link. And it's going to have a class name, which is going to be this right here. And then I also have to set the to. So this is going to go to the slash route. Then I can just remove this. There we are. This sets up this first one. We're going to have this button so that we can see this button when we're on a small screen. Then we have some of these classes here. And then we have more links. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove all of these list items. I'm just going to have this one for the home. And then again, I'm going to, instead of link, I'm going to use navlink. So navlink is really handy because here you can see this active class, which is on this home. Now what navlink does is that when you're on that route, it's going to automatically add this active class. That way we get the active styling. So that's why navlink is very handy. So then all I have to do is just pass a class name of navlink. And then when we're on the route, so in this case, the route that goes to slash, the route that goes to slash, then we're going to get the active class get added. And then we're going to have the appropriate styling. And then this one's just going to be home. So now I can just delete that. There we are. So now we have the home, and we're going to need a couple more. So I'm going to need one for the dashboard, then the login, the register. So dashboard. We'll go to slash dashboard. We're going to have login. This will go to login and then register. So there we are. So now if I go to my React app, there we go. Now I can navigate between these, or at least I thought I could. What happened? Oh, I spelled dashboard wrong, of course. So let's fix that. There we are. And then also you saw that if we go on a route that doesn't exist, like this, then we just get a blank screen. That is something you can deal with very easily by just having a catch-all route inside of your app. So at the bottom here, you can have some sort of catch-all route, which then is going to render a 404 not found page, but I'm not going to do that in this app. And then inside of here, what I want is for this dashboard, when I'm logged in, it's going to show up, and then these two aren't going to be here. So when I'm logged in, I want to see a dashboard and a logout button. And then when I'm not logged in, I want to see a login and register button. So I want to have that sort of logic. So with that in mind, I'm not going to have that logic until I hook up Redux and then also my route handlers. But for now, I can have something like const auth links, which is going to be some JSX and also guest links. So the syntax here is just going to directly return JSX for me. So it's nice and handy. I don't have to do like a arrow function or anything. I can just do this right here because it's literally just equal to JSX, which I'm going to set now. So I'm going to have dashboard. So that's going to be inside of auth links because auth links is going to be when I'm authenticated. Then I'm also going to have guest links. So my guest links are when I'm not authenticated. And I'm also going to have a fragment here because I can only have one JSX element being returned. I can't have two in a list like this. So with that, eventually I'm going to have something that checks if I'm authenticated. And then if I'm authenticated, I can show the auth links, otherwise show the guest links. So this is what I'm going to have eventually. For now, I'm just going to bring in the auth links and the guest links. All right. So now it's going to look the exact same. And then eventually I'm also going to add a logout button to here, which I guess I could even do right now, whatever. So I'm going to place this in here. And then I'm going to have another list item. I'll just copy this whole thing. And then inside of here, I'm going to have an anchor tag with an href Ooh, if I can type. There we go. And that's just going to be a shebang, and it's going to say logout. So that way we can also have this logout, which is also going to need this class. So there we are. So now we have all of these different buttons here. So we will have some logic soon to deal with some of these things. All right, so now we get to the next step, the fun part, which is hooking up Redux Toolkit. So we are going to need some packages now. So normally when you set up a Redux project, you need to do npm install, save, and then things like Redux, Redux Thunk, Redux DevTools extension, but we don't have to do all that. So instead we're going to do at redux.js/toolkit. This is going to install Redux Toolkit, and it's going to have a lot of those packages installed. The only thing we need to bring in is React Redux, because Redux isn't React specific. So this React Redux is just going to make our Redux store interact with our different React components. So that's what it's going to help us out with. So now I can just install these two packages. So the installation is already far simpler than with a traditional Redux project. And then I can just do npm start and just bring myself back here. So right now we're going to need to have a store. So store.js, and then we can go ahead and configure our store. So I can do export const store is equal to, and then I can import. So before you would use something called create store with Redux, you'd have to do a lot of the configuration with the middleware and whatnot. But now what Redux Toolkit gives us is configure store. And then it does a lot of these things behind the scenes so that we don't have to do it. So now we can call configure store and then pass. The only thing that we have to pass is reducer. And then here is where we're going to have our reducer. So that is something that we're going to get to. So for now, I'm just going to leave it like this and come back to it a little bit later. So let's open up some documentation now for Redux Toolkits. So get started. So here it shows you how to install it. So that's where that mystery was. Also, the template Redux was something I was mentioning when you're doing the create React app. And then you have the configure store. So the thing I'm going to go to is API reference. And then here we have some handy things. Now there also is something called RTK query, which I'm not going to be using in this project, but it is very handy. Because right now, Redux Toolkit, it gives us a lot of abstraction around Redux, and then RTK query has even more abstraction around Redux Toolkit, because it's going to be doing things like data fetching and caching behind the scenes, and it's going to abstract a lot of things that you do even with Redux Toolkit. So I'm not going to be using it just because it's a little bit more advanced, and there's a lot of abstraction already. And then also it's not super required in this sort of simple application. In an application where you have a lot of endpoints with data fetching, then RTK query would be very useful. So now what I'm going to do is take a look at these things. So reducers and actions. So for creating your action creators and reducers, you can do things like create reducer, create action, or you can do this create slice. So create slice is very nice because it's going to generate the action creator and reducers for you. So right here you can see how you can do that. You just bring in create slice, then you call it. You have to pass a name. So the name is typically going to be something related to the data type, and also these slices will also, you can think about it in a way where it's like it's dealing with a particular slice of data. So in our case, we could have, let's say, a user slice of data. And then if we have like an e-commerce app, then we can have like a production slice of data or whatever else you might have. So in our case, we just have a user slice of data. So that is what I'm going to do. And then that's what you pass in the name. Also, when you're using Redux Toolkit, you don't need to create dispatch types like you would before. They will get generated for you. So in this case, it's going to be utilizing the name and also whatever you call your reducer inside of here. So in this case, for something like increment, your dispatch type would be counter/increment. So it just generates this for you, which is very nice. You don't have to create a file where you define a bunch of these dispatch types. And then also initial state What's very nice with this is it's going to ensure that you pass this, so that way you don't ever make a mistake around that. And then this right here, it's a little bit deceiving in a way because we call this reducers, and then here we have our reducers, but we're also going to have the action creators created behind the scenes when we have our reducers. So here we're going to have an action creator, which is going to be called increment. And then here at the bottom, you can also see a line where they do counterslice dot actions, and then they destructure all of the action creators. So they have one that's increment, decrement, and increment by amount. So all of those action creators were generated, even though inside of here, it was inside of this reducers. And then you can also do counterslice dot reducer, and then that's going to be the reducer itself. And then another really important note is that right here, you can see that the state, it's being manipulated directly. So this is something that I want to quickly point out. So this is just going to be some dummy code that I'm writing here. So let's say if you have an initial state. So initial state, it's going to be an object where I have some kind of first, let's say, some second, and third. And then this right here can have something like fourth, which by default would maybe be this. And also I need a comma. The second would have fifth, which would be some dummy string. Also I need my comma. And then this third could have something like val1 and val2. So maybe this is your initial state. So when you have something like your switch, where you have your action type, and let's get rid of this. So when you have something like your switch cases, like you would normally have, then you'd have your different case. So before it would be something like, let's say, login success. You'd have a dispatch type. Then inside of here, you'd have to return a copy of your state. So you do not manipulate the state directly when you're using Redux. That's just a design pattern of Redux, and there's good reasons for it, just to keep things predictable, keep things from being bug prone, make it easier to do things like testing. So there's a lot of motivation behind doing it in this sort of pattern. So where you return a brand new copy. You're not doing something like state dot. So let's say here, for whatever reason, this is just a dummy example, we have is authenticated, which is false. And then we want to make this be true. So we can't do state.first.second.third.is authenticated equals true. This goes against the Redux design pattern. Instead, we would have to do something like return spread operator on state, if it can let me do this, state, there you go. And then you would have your first. So first. And then also in this case, I only have this first, so just to make this more obvious why you do this kind of thing, I'll do sixth here. There's also some dummy value. So spread operator on state, so that we don't change this, then you're gonna have first with spread operator on state dot first, and then second, where then you're gonna have spread operator on state dot first dot second, and then you're gonna have your third, or then you're gonna have the spread operator on state dot first dot second dot third, and then finally you're gonna have is authenticated set to true. So you would normally have to do something like this. Now it's not a big deal when your state's not super complicated, but when it is like this, then it's quite a pain to do something like this. So now what Redux Toolkit does is it has a package called immer. So immer, it's going to apply on both the create reducer and the create slice. And then what immer will allow you to do is to actually just simply do state dot first dot second dot third dot is authenticated equals true. So immer is what's going to let you do this. Now this is not going against the Redux design pattern, because immer behind the scenes is gonna do something like this, but it's just that when you use Redux Toolkit, immer just makes it easier so that you can change these different state values. So that's just something to note. You can only do this in Redux Toolkit because of immer. Normally, you would have to do something like this. Immer will just let you do this because it'll handle this sort of thing behind the scenes in the create reducer and create slice functions. So that's just something I wanted to quickly note here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this whole thing just so that the creation of the slice is a little easier. So I'm going to go into my features auth and just paste this in here. So I'm going to bring in create slice. I'm going to have initial state. And then for my initial state, I'm going to have is authenticated, which by default will be false. I'm going to have user by default will be null. And then eventually when we do retrieve a user, it'll be something like first name, whatever the first name is, last name, and email. But by default, it'll be null. And then I'm going to have loading, which by default will be false. So that way we can show a loader instead of a button when we're doing things like registering, logging in, and so forth. Then I'm also going to have this registered, which is also going to be false. So this registered, it's going to be set to true when we successfully register for an account. And then we're going to have on our containers register page, we're going to navigate when we see that that's set to true. And then on the login page, we're just going to dispatch something that sets that back to false. That way we can navigate back to our register page without constantly getting redirected. So that's what this thing is. And then instead of counter, I'm going to have a name of either user or auth. I might do user. And then I'm going to call this user slice because we're dealing with the user data in a way. I guess it also is auth, but it's also dealing with the user data. So I might call this user. And I might even rename this to user. So I'll just have user.js instead because it's the user data. And then in my reducers, so here's the thing. Right now, so this reducers, what's between here, it's going to handle things that are synchronous. So synchronous dispatches. Now, Redux Thunk has the Thunk middleware by default, and then it has something called a create async thunk, which is going to allow you to actually do the asynchronous dispatches. So these async thunks are something that we can go ahead and utilize. Now these async thunks are something that we define outside of this slice. So that's something to know. So with this reducers, whatever's inside of here, it's generating action creators. But now we're going to have action creators that are defined outside of here. So my new action creator will be the async thunk. And then I somehow need to handle this action creator and have reducers that handle the dispatch types from this thing. And this user slice, it has a way to do that. Now there is one thing that's going to be synchronous, and that's going to be my reset registered, which is just going to take state. So this can be state action, but I won't be utilizing any action, so I'm just going to have state, and then arrow function, and then state.registered I will set to false. So this right here is going to be the only synchronous action creator, and this is going to be one that I dispatch on the login page. That's just going to set this back to false, because when I register successfully, this value will be true. So I'm just going to have something that allows me to set it back to false. So that's going to be this right here. And then I can do reset registered, because this action creator got generated based on what I passed here. And then this is going to be user slice. And then I'm also going to have user slice.reducer. So this is what I'm going to have in here for now. And then back inside of my store, I can import my user reducer. And that's going to come from features/user. And then I can do user reducer. And there we go. So now whenever I want to access values that have to do with this user, I'm going to be doing things like user dot whatever state I want. So ultimately what I'm going to have inside of my different pages is I'm going to have a sort of import for a use selector hook. And then I'll be able to grab different values. So things like my users, whoops, not import, but const user will be use selector, where I do state, arrow function, state.user. So state.user is going to be my different state values. So this is the way I'm going to be grabbing them inside of my pages. And then I can also destructure the different values, like my is authenticated, and then the user, the loading, registered. So this is the way I'll be handling that. So So right now that I have my store, the next thing I have to do is set up my provider tag. So back inside of my app.js, maybe, yeah, I'll do it below here. So I'll import my provider, which comes from React Redux. And then my provider is going to wrap my entire application. And then I'm also going to need to import store, and that's going to come from store. So let's set up the provider tag. And then I'm going to plop this between here and set store equal to store. So there we are. So now finally, we have Redux set up in our application. And then if I go to the store, there's other things you can pass here too. So there's things like DevTools, which by default will be true. That's going to be where I can use that DevTools extension with Chrome. Also, Firefox has a DevTools extension that also works with this. And then there's other stuff you can pass here as well if you want additional middleware on top of the defaults, because there's things like the Redux Thunk and so forth. But if you want something like Logger, you can also do that. So they have an example of that somewhere here. Is it in the getting started? It's somewhere. I think configure store. And then here you can see some of those things. So reducer, middleware, and then DevTools. Then I think they also have an example. Yeah, so here they have Redux Logger. And then that's just an example to show that if you want an additional middleware on top of the defaults, then inside of the store, what you can do is this right here. You can use this middleware key, and then it's going to be a callback function, which is going to be get default middleware, which you call and then concat whatever additional middleware you want. So that's how you can add more middleware. And then also here's a handy little trick they use with the DevTools where you check if process.env.nodenv doesn't equal production. So in that case, you have this flipping between true and false. So that's something that I like. So I'm just going to grab that. And then, or actually I need DevTools and then that. And then instead of my env, I can have node env is equal to development in this case. So now inside of my application, if I refresh, right now I see that that environment variable is working because I have Redux in here. And then I can see my state where I have user is authenticated false, user null, loading false, and registered false. All right, so there's quite a bit in this video. And I guess one last thing I can do is just implement the logic here because now I can, since I have Redux. So that's going to be the last thing I do in this video, and then the next video I'll start dealing with the async thunks. So in my nav bar, right now you can see an example of using the use selector hook. Because now inside of here, I can do const is authenticated. If I can spell that right, actually I'm just going to do it like this, use selector, state, arrow function, state dot user. So again, we're doing dot user because in the store, in the store, we have this called user. If we call this something else, then we would do state dot that something else. Then in here, I can do is authenticated, and it's still not getting the auto suggestion for some reason, but that's all right. And then I can finally uncomment this and remove this. So there we are. And now I can see login and register, and the other buttons aren't there. But if my default state instead had the authenticated being true, then instead we'd see the dashboard and logout. But currently we're not authenticated, so I'll flip this back to false. All right, so this is a good place, I think, to put a pause. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit a like so that the YouTube algorithm can suggest this videos to all those who want to see something like this. And then if you want to see more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and then I'll see you guys in the next video.